a gun pointed directly at my daughter's face. I heard someone shout, "Freeze!" and felt my entire body go cold. The person holding the weapon was not a robber, not a criminal. It was our HOA security guard from our own neighborhood. What this man didn't know was that my daughter is an FBI tactical commander who has led some of the most dangerous raids in the country over the past 5 years. And things only went downhill from there. Where are you watching from right now? Drop a comment below and follow along as I tell you the story of how an arrogant HOA security guard dug his own grave when he messed with the wrong family. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. My name is Arthur Penhaligon, a 58-year-old retired history professor who spent 3 decades navigating the complex political landscapes of ancient empires. I thought I'd seen it all until I moved to Willow Creek Estates, an upscale gated community in Virginia that promised peace, security, and luxury living. What they didn't advertise in the glossy brochure was the dictatorship masquerading as a homeowners association. My wife passed away 5 years ago, and after spending years abroad, I wanted to settle somewhere beautiful and quiet. Willow Creek Estates seemed perfect with its pristine lawns, sparkling lake, and tight security. Little did I know that tight security would become my family's nightmare. My daughter, Chloe, is 26 and, unlike her academic father, chose a more action-oriented career path. After graduating top of her class at Quantico, she rose through the ranks of the FBI with remarkable speed, eventually becoming a tactical commander specializing in high-risk operations and financial crimes. I couldn't be prouder of her accomplishments, though I rarely get to see her due to the confidential nature of her work. When she called to say she was coming home for a few weeks of R&R after completing a 2-year international counterterrorism assignment, I was ecstatic. We had been living in Willow Creek Estates for only 3 months, and I was eager to show her our new home. The HOA at Willow Creek Estates was run with an iron fist by Gregory Finch, a 58-year-old former mid-level manager with a god complex and a trophy wife named Brenda, who treated the community as her personal fiefdom. From the moment I moved in, I found myself at odds with their excessive rules. Everything from the exact shade of white permitted for window blinds to which day of the week you could water your lawn. But the real enforcer of these petty tyrannies was Ron Becker, a 42-year-old former police academy washout who'd been dismissed from the program for excessive use of force. Now, as head of security for our HOA, he patrolled our streets like a warlord with his crew of 4 equally unpleasant guards. The incident happened on a Friday night in July. Chloe's flight had been delayed, and she arrived at Willow Creek Estates around 10 p.m. I had given her a key and the gate code but forgot to inform security about her arrival. A simple oversight that should have been easily resolved. As I waited in the living room, I heard raised voices outside. When I opened the front door, I froze at the sight before me. Ron Becker had his gun drawn and pointed directly at my daughter's face while his partner, Jason, stood nearby with his hand on his holster. "I don't care what ID you're showing me. You don't have resident clearance," Ron was shouting at Chloe, who remained perfectly calm despite having a weapon aimed at her. "Get on the ground now, or I will consider you a threat." The porch light illuminated the scene in harsh shadows, and I could see the neighbors' curtains twitching as they peered out at the commotion. Chloe stood perfectly still, her hands visible, her face composed in a way that only years of facing actual danger could teach someone. She had recognized instantly that Ron was holding a Glock 19 and that he almost certainly didn't have proper licensing to carry it as a private security guard. "Ron, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted, rushing forward. "That's my daughter." I moved a step between them, but Chloe subtly shifted her stance to keep me from putting myself in the line of fire. Ron didn't lower his weapon immediately, his face flushed with the thrill of power. "Your daughter should have checked in with security," he sneered, finally lowering the gun after what seemed like an eternity. "We have protocols here, Mr. Penhaligon. No exceptions. Not even for FBI agents, if that idea is even real." Chloe remained silent, studying Ron with the focused attention of someone memorizing every detail for later. Only when the gun was completely lowered did she speak, her voice measured and precise. "Mr. Becker, I believe you should be aware that pointing a firearm at a federal officer without cause is a felony. Additionally, I don't believe you have the proper licensing to carry that weapon as a security guard in this state." The color drained from Ron's face, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. "This is private property. Different rules apply here," he said, though with noticeably less conviction. "I'll be reporting this incident to Mr. Finch. Expect to hear from the HOA board." As they walked away, I could hear Jason whispering urgently to Ron, clearly concerned about what had just transpired. I ushered Chloe inside and closed the door, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and residual fear. "I'm so sorry about that, sweetheart. This place has strict security, but that was completely unacceptable." Chloe set her bag down calmly and gave me a reassuring hug. "It's okay, Dad. I faced worse. But I think we need a long-term strategy for dealing with these guys. That man is dangerous, not because he's skilled, but because he's insecure and armed. That's always a bad combination." As we sat in the kitchen that night, catching up over cups of tea that grew cold as we talked, Chloe asked pointed questions about the HOA, their operations, and particularly about Ron Becker. Her analytical mind was already at work, connecting dots I hadn't even seen. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "sometimes the most interesting cases aren't the big terrorist plots or bank heists. Sometimes, it's the small-town tyrants abusing their little kingdoms that need the most attention." I laughed at that, relieved to have my capable daughter home, but I had no idea how prophetic her words would prove to be. The next morning brought the expected knock on our door. Gregory Finch stood there in pressed khakis and a polo shirt emblazoned with the Willow Creek Estates logo. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his expression was one of practiced concern masking obvious disdain. Behind him stood his wife, Brenda, dressed as if for a country club brunch rather than a neighborhood confrontation. Gregory held a formal letter of warning in his manicured hand. "Mr. Penhaligon," he said, not bothering to wait for an invitation inside, "we need to discuss last night's unfortunate incident." His voice carried the artificial warmth of someone who had taken too many executive communication courses. "Unfortunate incident?" I repeated, feeling my academic training battling with my parental instinct to tell him exactly where he could shove that letter. "Your security guard pointed a loaded weapon at my daughter's face for the crime of coming home after dark. There's nothing unfortunate about it. It was illegal and dangerous." Gregory's smile didn't waver, though his eyes hardened. "Our security team was simply following protocol. Had you properly registered your guest?" I cut him off, something I rarely did in my professorial career. "My daughter is not a guest. She's my family visiting her home, and no protocol justifies drawing a weapon on an unarmed person showing identification." Chloe appeared beside me, dressed casually but with an alertness that never seemed to leave her. She placed a calming hand on my arm before addressing Gregory directly. "Mr. Finch, I understand the need for security protocols. However, I'd be interested to know if all your security personnel are properly licensed for armed work in this state. I noticed some irregularities last night that concerned me." Her tone was professional, almost friendly, but I recognized the subtle interrogation technique. Gregory's smile flickered momentarily before he recovered. "All our staff meet the highest standards, Miss Penhaligon. Now, if you'll accept this formal warning, we can put this matter behind us." He held out the envelope, which neither of us moved to take. "I don't think we will be accepting that," Chloe said pleasantly, "but I appreciate you stopping by." She closed the door gently but firmly, leaving Gregory and Brenda standing stunned on our porch. Through the window, I watched them retreat down the walkway, Brenda's animated gestures suggesting she was already spinning this encounter for maximum neighborhood gossip value. That was satisfying, I admitted, but probably not strategic. Chloe smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. "Oh, I don't know. Sometimes you need to establish clear boundaries before you can begin negotiations. And make no mistake, Dad, we're now in negotiations, whether they realize it or not." Later that day, we met Eleanor Vance, a 65-year-old retired nurse who lived 3 doors down. She brought over a welcome pie, belatedly, she explained, because she'd been visiting her grandchildren. In the course of conversation, it became clear that Eleanor represented a silent faction in Willow Creek Estates. residents who chafed under the Finch regime but lacked the influence or courage to challenge it. Gregory and Brenda have run this place like their personal fiefdom for 5 years, she explained as we sat on the patio. Anyone who questions them finds themselves buried in violation notices or excluded from community events. Most people just pay the ridiculous fines and keep their heads down. Chloe listened intently, asking occasional questions that seemed casual but were clearly building a comprehensive picture of the community dynamics. Over the next few days, Chloe immersed herself in studying the HOA bylaws, pointing out numerous clauses that wouldn't hold up to legal scrutiny. Meanwhile, Ron began parking his security vehicle across from our house for extended periods, an obvious intimidation tactic that might have worked on someone who hadn't faced down actual terrorists. I noticed other changes, too. Neighbors who had been friendly suddenly became scarce, and Eleanor reported that Brenda was hosting a ladies' tea to which I, the only single father in the community, was conspicuously not invited. Chloe spent hours on her laptop, occasionally making quiet phone calls from the privacy of her room. When I asked what she was researching, she showed me a disturbing pattern. Ron Becker had been dismissed from the police academy after multiple excessive force complaints, and Gregory had personally intervened to get him hired at Willow Creek Estates despite his troubling record. More concerning, the security company officially contracted by the HOA appeared to be paying Ron significantly more than standard rates for his position. "There's something not right with the finances here," Chloe murmured, scrolling through public records she'd somehow accessed. The HOA fees in this community are among the highest in the state, but the services don't match the expenditure. The Cold War escalated when Chloe encountered Brenda Finch at the local grocery store. I wasn't present, but Chloe recounted how Brenda had accidentally rammed her shopping cart into Chloe's while pretending not to see her. "Oh, it's the FBI agent," Brenda had said loudly enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "I hope you're not investigating our little grocery store. We're all law-abiding citizens here, except for those who don't follow the rules." Chloe had simply smiled and replied, "Actually, financial crimes are one of my specialties. It's amazing what people think they can hide in plain sight." Brenda had blanched slightly before hurrying away, but not before a woman in a professional pantsuit had witnessed the entire exchange with evident interest. That woman turned out to be Jessica Miller, a 40-year-old attorney who served on the HOA board but had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Gregory's leadership. She approached Chloe in the parking lot, introducing herself and suggesting they meet for coffee. "There are things happening in Willow Creek Estates that don't add up," Jessica had told her. "Financial discrepancies, suspicious contracts, selective enforcement of rules. Some of us have been gathering evidence, but we need someone who knows how to use it effectively." As Chloe related this conversation to me that evening, her eyes gleamed with the look I recognized from childhood, the one that appeared whenever she encountered a puzzle worthy of her talents. "Sometimes, Dad," she said thoughtfully, "you have to let your enemies think they're winning before you can turn the table." A week later, the annual HOA meeting provided the perfect opportunity to observe the Finch regime in its full glory. The community center was arranged like a small fiefdom, with Gregory and Brenda seated at an elevated table at the front, flanked by Ron and the HOA treasurer, David Clark, a 45-year-old accountant who nodded vigorously at everything Gregory said. We were deliberately assigned seats in the back row, a petty power play that made me smile when I saw how it actually gave Chloe a perfect vantage point to observe everyone without being closely watched herself. She had spent the intervening days cultivating relationships with several residents who, like Jessica, harbored quiet resentments against the current leadership. She had also reconnected with an old friend from the FBI Academy, Officer James Rodriguez, who now served with the local police department. The meeting proceeded predictably at first. Gregory gave a self-congratulatory speech about property values and community standards. Brenda announced upcoming social events to which, I suspected, we wouldn't be invited. And David presented a financial report so vague it could have described any organization's finances. When the floor opened for questions, I raised my hand. Drawing on my years of experience reviewing historical budgets, I asked, "I noticed the security expenditures have increased 30% over last year, but there's no itemization of those costs. Could you provide a breakdown?" The room went quiet, Apparently, detailed questions weren't part of the usual script. Gregory's smile tightened. Security is our top priority at Willow Creek Estates, Mr. Penhaligon. The board has reviewed and approved all expenditures. I persisted politely. I understand, but as residents paying these increased fees, don't we have the right to know exactly what we're paying for? David shuffled his papers nervously while Gregory's face reddened. The detailed financials are available to board members only for security reasons. If there are no other questions, he moved to continue, but Jessica, surprisingly, spoke up. Actually, I'm on the board and I don't recall seeing the itemized security expenses either. A murmur spread through the room as Gregory shot Jessica a look of pure venom. Ron took a step forward, positioning himself near me in an obvious attempt at intimidation. The tension in the room was palpable as Gregory abruptly changed the subject, rushing through the remaining agenda items before declaring the meeting adjourned. As people filed out, Brenda Finch made a beeline for Jessica, engaging her in what appeared to be a heated conversation by the refreshment table. Meanwhile, Ron and another security guard positioned themselves near the exit, watching us with undisguised hostility. "Let them make the next move," Chloe whispered as we walked to our car. "They're rattled, which means they'll get sloppy." Sure enough, as we attempted to leave the parking lot, a security vehicle suddenly blocked our path. Ron approached my window, his expression smug. "Sir, your car is in violation of the HOA parking regulations. The angle exceeds the permitted 15 degrees from the curb." It was such a blatant harassment tactic that I nearly laughed. But Chloe placed a warning hand on my arm. "Officer Becker," she said calmly from the passenger seat, "I believe you're mistaken, but more importantly, you're impeding the exit of a vehicle, which is a traffic violation." She pulled out her phone and dialed a number, her eyes never leaving Ron's face. "Officer Rodriguez?" "Yes, it's Chloe Penhaligon. I'm at the Willow Creek Estates Community Center, and we're having an issue with security personnel blocking our vehicle and making false claims about violations. Could you send someone over?" The transformation in Ron's demeanor was instantaneous. His face paled as he realized that Chloe wasn't bluffing about her connections. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," he muttered, signaling his colleague to move the security vehicle. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror to see Gregory and Brenda watching from the community center steps, their expressions a mixture of anger and, for the first time, uncertainty. "That won't endear us to the neighbors," I commented as we turned onto our street. Chloe's response was thoughtful. "We don't need to be loved, Dad. We just need to be respected. And sometimes respect only comes after you've shown your strength." Back at home, Chloe revealed more of what she discovered. Ron isn't just a bad academy washout with an attitude problem. He's a symptom of a larger issue. I've been looking into the HOA finances with Jessica's help, and there are serious irregularities. For one thing, the security company supposedly employing Ron and his team is registered to Gregory's brother-in-law, charging premium rates for substandard service. She pulled out a folder containing financial reports spanning 5 years. And that's just the beginning. According to these records, there's over $300,000 that can't be accounted for, money that's supposedly been spent on infrastructure improvements that no one can actually point to. I leafed through the documents, my academic experience making the patterns clear. "This looks like a classic embezzlement scheme," I said, impressed despite the seriousness of the situation. "But why risk it for relatively small amounts? Gregory doesn't seem to be hurting for money." Chloe smiled grimly. "It's rarely about need, Dad. It's about entitlement. People like Gregory and Brenda believe the rules don't apply to them. The money is almost secondary to the power trip." She tapped another document, this one showing property records. "Did you know Gregory owns 3 investment properties in this community through shell companies? Properties that mysteriously never receive violation notices despite clear infractions." As we discussed potential approaches, Chloe's phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Board emergency meeting called for tomorrow. G is pushing new bylaw amendments. Need to talk." Chloe showed me the message, her expression turning resolute. They are accelerating their timeline, which means we need to accelerate ours. I think it's time to bring in some professional help. She made a call, speaking in the clipped, efficient language I recognized from her work communications. Marcus, it's Chloe. I need a consult on a financial analysis. Civilian matter, but time-sensitive. Can you come to Virginia tomorrow? Perfect. I'll send the address. When she hung up, she explained that Special Agent Marcus Reed was one of the FBI's top financial crime specialists. He's between cases and owes me a favor. With his help, we can verify what I'm seeing in these records and build a solid case. I raised an eyebrow. A case? Chloe, this is a neighborhood dispute, not a federal investigation. Her expression was serious as she replied, Dad, when people in positions of power abuse that power and potentially commit financial crimes in the process, it's exactly the kind of case that needs proper investigation. And besides, she added with a small smile, nobody points a gun at me and gets away with it. The Finch's response was swift and predictable. The next morning, we received 5 separate HOA violation notices, each more ridiculous than the last. Our trash can was allegedly 2 inches out of position. The shade of our porch light was excessively warm-toned. The American flag I'd hung was improperly illuminated after sunset. The petty harassment continued throughout the week. Ron or one of his men would park outside our house for hours, taking photos of alleged infractions. When I attempted to use the community pool, I was informed that my membership privileges had been temporarily suspended pending review of outstanding violations. Several neighbors who had been friendly now crossed the street to avoid interactions, clearly having been warned against associating with the Penhaligon family. Through it all, Chloe remained remarkably composed, even amused. Classic intimidation tactics, she observed as we collected the day's mail, including 2 more violation notices. They're trying to make us uncomfortable enough to either capitulate or move. Unfortunately for them, they've picked the wrong targets. Indeed, rather than feeling intimidated, I found myself growing more determined with each petty attack. During my academic career, I'd faced down tenured dictators and negotiated during departmental civil wars. Gregory Finch's suburban tyranny was amateur hour by comparison. Chloe's colleague, Marcus Reed, arrived as promised, a no-nonsense 40-year-old with an accountant's attention to detail and an investigator's instincts. He spent 2 days reviewing the financial documents Jessica had provided, occasionally whistling softly at particularly egregious discrepancies. If these records are accurate, he told us while working at our dining room table, you're looking at multiple violations of financial regulations. The security contract alone is textbook self-dealing, and the pattern of infrastructure improvements with no corresponding work being done strongly suggests embezzlement. Meanwhile, Chloe had installed security cameras around our property. Not the obvious kind that would give Gregory grounds for another violation notice, but sophisticated, nearly invisible devices that recorded continuously. Just documenting everything, she explained when I raised an eyebrow at the equipment. Building a case requires evidence. Her foresight proved valuable when, 3 days after the HOA meeting, the cameras captured Ron and 2 other security guards conducting an unauthorized inspection of our yard at 3 a.m., measuring the height of our grass with flashlights and taking photographs of our property. The situation escalated when Eleanor Vance came to our door in tears. Brenda Finch had cornered her at the community center, threatening to have her grandchildren banned from visiting if she continued her friendship with us. I'm so sorry, Eleanor kept saying, but my grandkids are all I have since my husband passed. I can't risk losing their visits. Chloe comforted her with unexpected gentleness. You have nothing to apologize for, Eleanor. People like the Finches prey on these kinds of connections, but I promise you this, they won't be in power much longer. That evening, we observed unusual activity at the Finch residence. David Clark arrived after dark, carrying file folders, followed 30 minutes later by Ron. Their meeting lasted over 2 hours, with all 3 men visible through the window, gesturing animatedly. They're panicking, Chloe observed as we watched from our darkened living room. Jessica's questions at the meeting spooked them, and they're trying to cover their tracks. She picked up her phone and sent several texts, then turned to me with a determined expression. Time to move to the next phase. The following morning brought the confrontation Ron had clearly been building toward. He arrived at our door with 2 security guards, all 3 wearing expressions of grim satisfaction. "Mandatory security inspection," he announced, attempting to push past me into the house. I blocked the doorway, feeling a surge of anger I rarely allowed myself to express. "You have no authority to enter my home without permission or a warrant," I stated firmly. Ron smirked, holding up a piece of paper. HOA Bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 3. Security personnel may conduct inspections of any property upon reasonable suspicion of bylaw violations. We've documented 27 violations in the past week alone. Chloe appeared beside me, her phone visibly recording the encounter. "That bylaw clause directly contradicts state law regarding private property rights," she informed him calmly. "And speaking of documentation, would you like to explain why you were in our yard at 3 a.m. 2 nights ago?" Ron's expression faltered momentarily before hardening into undisguised hostility. "You're interfering with HOA security operations. There will be consequences." As they retreated, I noticed one of the guards glancing back nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. That night, our security cameras captured Ron and the same nervous guard returning after midnight. This time, their actions went beyond harassment. They deliberately damaged our garden, uprooting plants and spray painting an obscene message on our fence. When I saw the footage the next morning, I was livid, ready to confront them directly. But Chloe placed a restraining hand on my arm. "This is exactly what we need," she said, her voice calm but her eyes sparkling with determination. "They're getting desperate, making mistakes. Each one strengthens our position." She made a phone call, speaking in the clipped, professional tone I recognized from her work. "It's time," she said simply. "We need support for the next phase." When she hung up, she turned to me with a confident smile. "Dad, remember how you always taught me that in diplomacy, timing is everything? Well, I think it's time to show these neighborhood tyrants what happens when they mistake patience for weakness." The weekend brought an unexpected sight. A group of neighbors gathered on our lawn, tools in hand, ready to help repair the damage to our garden. Jessica Miller had organized the effort, bringing together residents who had suffered similar harassment, but had previously been too intimidated to speak out. While they worked, stories poured out. Selective enforcement of rules, questionable fines, social ostracism orchestrated by Brenda for those who questioned Gregory's decisions. With each shared experience, the group's collective resolve strengthened. What had begun as a simple garden restoration project was transforming into something more powerful, a community finding its voice. Among the volunteers was Marcus Reed, who introduced himself simply as Chloe's colleague without mentioning his FBI credentials. His presence proved fortunate when Ron drove by slowly, clearly documenting who was associating with us. "Is that the security guard you mentioned?" Marcus asked quietly, his trained eye taking in Ron's aggressive posture and the bulge under his jacket that suggested he was armed. When Chloe nodded, Marcus excused himself to make a phone call. 20 minutes later, Officer James Rodriguez happened to stop by in his patrol car, his presence sending Ron scurrying away. Inside the house, away from curious ears, James shared what he discovered about Ron Becker. "His file is a mess, Chloe. Multiple complaints of excessive force, 2 suspicious shootings ruled justified under questionable circumstances, and a domestic violence call that mysteriously disappeared from the records. He was quietly pushed out of the department with a neutral recommendation, which is how he ended up here." He hesitated before continuing. "There's more. He doesn't have a valid license to carry a concealed weapon as a private security officer. The one he showed you expired last year and wasn't renewed due to concerns about his psychological evaluation." While the community effort outside represented the public face of our growing coalition, the real work was happening inside, where Chloe, Marcus, Jessica, and James were building a case file against the Finch regime. Jessica had been secretly copying HOA financial records for months, documenting discrepancies between reported expenditures and actual services. Marcus had traced the web of shell companies connecting Gregory to various vendors receiving inflated contracts. James had pulled police reports showing a pattern of selective law enforcement at Ron's request. Tickets issued to Finch critics while violations by allies were ignored. A security company that supposedly employs Ron and his team, Marcus explained, pointing to a complex flowchart on my dining room table. It's registered to Brenda's brother, operates out of a virtual office, and has no other clients besides Willow Creek Estates. They've received over $150,000 annually for the past 3 years, but their tax filings show they only pay out about $60,000 in total wages. The rest simply disappears into offshore accounts. Jessica nodded grimly. And that's just one example. The landscaping contract, the road maintenance, the community center renovations, they all follow the same pattern. Companies with connections to Gregory receive inflated contracts, perform minimal work, and the excess funds vanish. As our allies left that evening, the garden restored and our coalition strengthened. Eleanor lingered behind. "I've been thinking about what you said, Chloe," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it before. "They can't actually ban my grandchildren from visiting. That's not even in the bylaws. I've been letting fear control me, and I'm done with that." Chloe smiled warmly. "That's exactly right, Eleanor. Their power exists only because people believe in it. Once that belief starts cracking," she left the thought unfinished. But we all understood the implication. The Finch regime was built on intimidation and the perception of authority rather than legitimate power, and perceptions could be changed. The next day brought an unexpected development. Gregory and Brenda Finch themselves appeared at our door, their expressions fixed in unconvincing smiles. "Arthur, we feel this situation has gotten out of hand," Gregory began, his tone artificially conciliatory. "We'd like to propose a resolution." He held out a document titled Mutual Non-Disclosure and Non-Litigation Agreement. Brenda nodded enthusiastically. "We're all neighbors, after all. There's no need for unpleasantness to continue." I invited them in with professorial courtesy, noting how Brenda's eyes darted around our living room, clearly looking for evidence of something she could report as a violation. Chloe read through the document with a lawyer's precision, occasionally raising an eyebrow at particularly audacious clauses. "This is interesting," she said finally. "Essentially, you're offering to stop issuing violation notices if we agree never to question HOA financial decisions or bring any legal claims against the association or its officers." She set the document down, her expression pleasantly neutral. "May I ask what prompted this sudden desire for reconciliation?" Gregory shifted uncomfortably. "As Brenda said, we're all neighbors. The community functions best when everyone works together harmoniously." "Harmoniously under your control, you mean?" I clarified, earning a warning glance from Chloe, who was clearly playing a longer game. Brenda's artificial smile hardened. "We've been very patient with your adjustment period, Mr. Penhaligon. Not everyone is cut out for community living. Perhaps if you find our standards too restrictive." Chloe interrupted smoothly. "What my father means is that harmony requires transparency and fairness. This agreement offers neither." She handed the document back to Gregory. "I'm afraid we'll have to decline." Gregory's mask of civility slipped momentarily, revealing the anger beneath. "You're making a serious mistake. There are consequences to defying the HOA leadership." As they turned to leave, Chloe called after them, her voice deliberately casual. "Oh, Gregory, just so you know, this conversation has been recorded. Threats against homeowners for exercising their legal rights could be construed as harassment under state law." The door closed on their stunned expressions, and I turned to Chloe with newfound appreciation for her strategic mind. "What's our next move?" I asked. Her smile was both confident and slightly mischievous. "A press conference, Dad. And you, with your professorial experience and natural gravitas, will be the perfect spokesperson." The emergency HOA meeting called by Gregory was clearly intended to push through new bylaws that would consolidate his power and make it easier to force out problem residents. The community center was packed, with tension hanging in the air like an approaching storm. Gregory sat at the front table, flanked by Brenda, David, and Ron. their expressions a mixture of determination and barely concealed anxiety. They had reason to be concerned. Chloe had executed her plan with military precision, ensuring that Officer Rodriguez, Agent Marcus Reed, and a reporter from the local newspaper were all present, strategically positioned throughout the room. Gregory called the meeting to order, his usual smooth confidence noticeably strained. Before we address the proposed bylaw amendments, I want to emphasize the importance of community solidarity. Willow Creek Estates has always prided itself on maintaining exceptional standards, which benefit everyone's property values. Unfortunately, some newer residents seem resistant to these standards, creating unnecessary division. His gaze fixed pointedly on me, but I merely smiled pleasantly, years of academic debates serving me well. When he finished his thinly veiled attack and moved to the First Amendment, which would grant security personnel unrestricted access to all properties, I raised my hand. "Point of order," I said, standing as Gregory reluctantly acknowledged me. "Before we vote on new powers for the board, I believe residents should be fully informed about how the current powers have been exercised." There was a murmur of interest as I moved to the front of the room, placing a folder on the table. As a resident concerned about transparency, I've reviewed the HOA financial records that should be available to all members but have been curiously difficult to access. Gregory attempted to interrupt, but Jessica quickly seconded my right to speak, citing the very bylaws Gregory had used to silence others. What followed was the most satisfying 30 minutes of my post-academic career. Drawing on skills honed in historical analysis, I methodically presented the evidence Chloe and our allies had gathered. The security company that receives $150,000 of our HOA fees annually is owned by Brenda Finch's brother and employs guards without proper licensing, including Mr. Becker, who has been documented threatening residents with an illegally carried firearm. Ron shifted uncomfortably as all eyes turned to him. I continued, "The landscaping contract was awarded to a company registered to Gregory's former college roommate at 60% above market rate, with minimal actual services provided." As I spoke, Jessica distributed packets containing financial documents, email communications, and photographs documenting the systematic abuses. Gregory's face flushed with anger while Brenda whispered furiously to David, who was beginning to look physically ill. Perhaps most concerning, I continued, is that over $300,000 collected for infrastructure improvements over the past 3 years cannot be accounted for in any verifiable projects. I believe the residents deserve an explanation before granting any additional powers to the current leadership. Ron moved toward me, his posture threatening, but Officer Rodriguez smoothly intercepted him, engaging him in a quiet but clearly stern conversation. Gregory stood abruptly, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "These accusations are completely baseless and potentially libelous. This meeting is adjourned immediately." His attempt to shut down the discussion backfired spectacularly as multiple residents rose in protest, demanding answers to the questions I'd raised. "The financial records speak for themselves," I replied calmly. "If there are legitimate explanations for these discrepancies, I'm sure we'd all be relieved to hear them." The situation deteriorated rapidly for the Finch regime when David, looking increasingly panicked, blurted out, "I just processed the paperwork Gregory gave me. I didn't know about the shell companies." Brenda gasped in horror at this admission while Gregory attempted to physically pull David away from the microphone. The reporter was taking notes furiously, and Marcus Reed had positioned himself near the exit, anticipating what might come next. Gregory, recognizing his crumbling position, changed tactics. "This is a private HOA matter that's being blown completely out of proportion. Mr. Penhaligon clearly has a personal vendetta after his daughter was appropriately questioned by security." Chloe, who had remained deliberately unobtrusive until this moment, now stepped forward, her expression professionally neutral but her eyes intense. "I believe the residents should see exactly what constitutes appropriate questioning in Willow Creek Estates." She connected her phone to the projector, and suddenly the room was filled with the security camera footage of Ron pointing his gun at her face, followed by additional footage of Ron and his team vandalizing our property under cover of darkness. The gasps from the assembled neighbors were audible, as was Brenda's moan of dismay. What happened next occurred so quickly that many residents later said they couldn't follow the sequence of events. Ron, pushed beyond his limited self-control by the public exposure of his actions, lunged toward me with a roar of rage. His hand moved toward his concealed weapon, and several people screamed in alarm. Before anyone else could react, Chloe moved with the fluid precision of her tactical training, intercepting Ron and disarming him with a series of movements so efficient they appeared almost casual. One moment Ron was charging forward with murderous intent. The next, he was face down on the floor, his own handcuffs securing his wrists behind his back, Chloe's knee placed precisely between his shoulder blades. Officer Rodriguez immediately took control of the subdued Ron, officially arresting him for assault, illegal possession of a concealed weapon, and making criminal threats. As Ron was led away, still shouting obscenities, Gregory made a desperate dash for the exit, only to find Marcus Reed waiting with identification in hand. "Gregory Finch? I'm Special Agent Marcus Reed with the FBI. I'd like to ask you some questions regarding the financial discrepancies in the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association accounts, particularly the offshore transfers from allegedly legitimate vendor payments." As Gregory was escorted out for questioning, the gathered residents sat in stunned silence for several moments before erupting into chaotic discussion. Jessica quickly took control of the meeting, her legal training serving her well as she calmed the crowd and established an interim leadership committee to manage HOA affairs until proper elections could be held. Brenda Finch, abandoned by her husband and suddenly facing the collapse of her social standing, fled the room in tears. David, looking simultaneously terrified and relieved, voluntarily surrendered all financial records to Officer Rodriguez, apparently hoping for leniency through cooperation. When the dust settled and the community center gradually emptied, Chloe and I walked home in the warm evening air, a strange sense of peace settling between us. Was all this really necessary? I asked her, genuinely curious about her approach. Couldn't we have just reported Ron for brandishing a weapon that first night and been done with it? Chloe considered the question thoughtfully before answering. We could have, but that would have addressed only a symptom, not the disease. What was happening in Willow Creek Estates wasn't just about one bad security guard. It was about systemic abuse of power that affected everyone. She smiled slightly. Besides, I'm trained to look at the bigger picture. One rogue security guard is a police matter. A coordinated scheme to defraud homeowners while using intimidation tactics to silence opposition? That's something worth dismantling properly. As we reached our house, a reporter who had followed us from the meeting called out, asking for a statement. "Who exactly are you, Ms. Penhaligon?" she inquired, notebook in hand. Chloe simply smiled. "Just a homeowner who knows her rights," she replied before guiding me inside and closing the door on the next chapter of what was sure to become Willow Creek Estates' legend. 3 months passed, bringing remarkable changes to Willow Creek Estates. The criminal investigations proceeded with methodical thoroughness, resulting in multiple charges against Gregory for embezzlement, fraud, and financial misconduct. Ron faced a separate set of charges related to illegal weapons possession, assault, property damage, and harassment. The small local newspaper's coverage of the HOA corruption scandal was picked up by larger outlets, bringing unwelcome publicity to the former leadership but ultimately beneficial transparency to the community itself. Brenda Finch, faced with mounting legal bills and the collapse of her social standing, quietly listed their house for sale and moved in with her sister in another state. David Clark, the treasurer who had enabled the financial misdeeds, cooperated fully with investigators in exchange for reduced charges, providing detailed testimony about how Gregory had manipulated the HOA finances for years. The security company was disbanded, replaced by a legitimate firm with properly licensed personnel who understood their limited authority. The most profound change, however, was in the community itself. Jessica Miller was elected as the new HOA president, with Eleanor Vance serving as vice president. Their first official acts included revising the bylaws to ensure transparency, establishing reasonable enforcement procedures, and reducing the exorbitant fees that had funded the previous regime's excesses. Community events became genuinely inclusive rather than opportunities for social hierarchy enforcement, and neighbors who had previously avoided each other now stopped to chat while walking dogs or collecting mail. One evening, as Chloe and I sat on our porch enjoying the sunset before her departure for a new assignment, Brenda Finch unexpectedly appeared at our gate. She looked drastically different, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans, her carefully maintained appearance now showing signs of strain. "May I speak with you?" she asked hesitantly. I glanced at Chloe, who nodded slightly, and invited Brenda to join us. She declined the offered chair, standing awkwardly as she struggled to find words. "I wanted to apologize before I leave permanently," she finally said. "I knew about some of what Gregory was doing. Not all of it, but enough that I should have spoken up. I convinced myself it wasn't hurting anyone, that it was just the way things worked." Chloe regarded her thoughtfully. "Why did you participate in it, Brenda? You must have known it was wrong." Brenda's composure cracked slightly. "You have to understand. My entire identity was wrapped up in being Mrs. Gregory Finch, the Queen of Willow Creek Estates. I was nobody before I married him, just a receptionist from a small town. The status, the respect, the envy of other women. I became addicted to it." She looked down at her unmanicured hands. "Now I'm starting over at 55 with nothing but alimony and regrets." I felt a surprising twinge of sympathy for her, recognizing the universal human desire for significance that had led her down such a destructive path. After Brenda left, Chloe and I decided to host an impromptu barbecue, inviting the neighbors who had stood with us and others who simply wanted to be part of the community's fresh start. As twilight descended and conversations flowed freely across my once scrutinized lawn, Jessica pulled me aside. "Your daughter is remarkable," she said, watching Chloe chatting easily with a group of residents. "I've learned more about leadership from watching her these past months than in my entire career. She never sought credit or control, just justice and proper order. The community will miss her." I nodded, feeling the familiar mixture of pride and wistfulness that came with having a daughter whose extraordinary capabilities meant she was often called away to where she was needed most. Later that night, after our guests had departed and the house was quiet, Chloe and I sat on the porch steps with glasses of bourbon, enjoying our last evening together before her early morning flight. "I've been thinking about what you did here," I told her, the liquor loosening my typical reserve. "You could have handled Ron personally that first night and been done with it. Instead, you orchestrated a complete community transformation." "Why?" Chloe considered her glass thoughtfully before answering. "Growing up watching you work, I learned that true diplomacy isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about transforming it into something constructive. Ron pointing a gun at me was just a symptom of a toxic system. Removing him alone would have solved nothing." She gazed out at the peaceful neighborhood where porch lights twinkled like earthbound stars. "The strategy wasn't about revenge, Dad. It was about restoration. Communities like this one should be places where people look out for each other, not fear each other." I understood then what had motivated her patient, methodical approach. It wasn't just the tactical commander in her that had responded to the threat, but the community builder, a quality I hadn't fully appreciated until now. "I've spent my career dismantling threats," she continued quietly, "but there's something uniquely satisfying about building something better in the aftermath." As dawn broke the next morning and I prepared to drive Chloe to the airport, we received a stack of thank you cards from neighbors, many of whom we'd barely known 3 months earlier. "Will you be all right here without me?" Chloe asked as we loaded her luggage into the car. "What if some other security guard decides to throw his weight around?" I laughed, feeling more at home in Willow Creek Estates than I had since moving in. "I think I can manage. Your old man still has a few diplomatic tricks up his sleeve." As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the house that had transformed from a site of conflict to a true home and, beyond it, to the community that had found its voice. "You know," Chloe said thoughtfully as we neared the airport, "there's a philosophy I've developed over my years in tactical command. Sometimes you don't need to fire a weapon to win a battle. Sometimes, understanding the game your opponent is playing and turning it to your advantage is the greatest victory of all." She smiled at me, the rising sun illuminating her profile. "And sometimes, the most peaceful communities have weathered the worst storms. Since that incident, whenever an HOA in Willow Creek Estates or beyond considers overstepping its authority, the story of the FBI commander's daughter and her history professor father is often recalled as a cautionary tale. Not all heroes wear capes. Sometimes they simply understand their rights and refuse to be intimidated. And perhaps the most important lesson: never point a gun at someone when you don't know who they are, especially if that person happens to be an FBI tactical commander with a gift for strategic thinking and a deep commitment to justice.